Good morning. All right, so today we're going to continue our conversation about pregnancy, and we will focus today's lecture on implantation and placentation. So hopefully you've been keeping up with your reproduction, and so you have come to the point where the sperm and egg have met, we have fertilization. So now what happens? How does this turn into a baby, and how does it connect to the mom? So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so let's get our anatomy and figure out where we are. So hopefully you know that, of course, this large structure here is the cervix, which is the entryway into the uterus. You have an inside of the uterus, which is lined with endometrial tissue, and that's where eventually the fertilized egg is going to go, and it's going to wind up being turning into the baby over time. So the way this particular slide starts, it's going to start at this end, okay? So we have sperm traveling up through the cervix into the uterus. They're going to travel through the fallopian tube, and I hope you can see these little purple things. These are the sperm, okay? So the egg has been, or the ovum has been ovulated from the ovary, and so hopefully you understand the process of ovulation, and remember the LH surge, and know the role of FSH and LH and estrogens and progesterones, and all of that's just really second nature to you now, I hope. So the egg has been ovulated. It's got that little circle of that corona radiata around it. So you have the oocyte, which has been released. It's been caught by the fimbriae, being traveled into the fallopian or uterine tubes, where possibly it meets the sperm. So the sperm and egg meet, and you get fertilization. Okay? And so once the egg has been fertilized, we call that the zygote stage. I think I'm awful. There we go. Zygote stage, the fertilized egg. So remember, once you have fertilization, the oocyte undergoes the rest of meiosis II. You get the fusing of the mother and father's DNA together, and now you have a diploid organism. So now you've got the beginnings of a baby. So this fertilized egg, or now zygote, now has to travel through the uterine tube so that it can implant eventually into the uterus. And so as it's doing that, it's undergoing mitosis. Okay, so it's starting to develop, it's starting to grow. And so I've just kind of pulled out, your textbook has pulled out a couple of stages, kind of important stages, and what you can expect to see and how rapidly these cells are dividing. So you can see the very first thing that happens is that one fertilized egg that's now diploid is going to undergo mitosis and divide into two. And then it's going to divide into 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then 32, and then 74, is that right? No, what's 32 and 32? No, 76, that sounds right. So it's going to continue, math is hard, it's going to continue to divide and divide and divide, and you're going to get more and more and more of these cells. So here you have what's called cleavage. And cleavage is where you're actually getting cell division, but the actual size of the overall organism is not getting bigger. So if you kind of look at the size, the overall size from here to here to here, you see the overall size is not getting any larger, but the number of cells within that ball are getting more numerous. And so this allows mitosis to occur if you get more and more cells without it getting so big that it blocks itself inside the fallopian tube. Does that make sense? So think of it that way. You don't want it to get stuck. So it's going to divide into 2 cells and then 4 cells. We call this the 4-cell stage, which is nice to know. It's easy to remember. And that happens in about 2 days. By the end of the 3rd day, you have what's called the morula, which is just a really like a mulberry stage, or like a raspberry stage, where you've got many cells. And we call this a solid ball of blastomeres. So these are cells that literally can become anything at this point, so they really haven't started to differentiate too much. All right, so then you get to 4 days, and you get to what's called an early blastocyst. And what that's telling you is there's now a cavity. So there's the morula has hollowed out, and you get a blastocyst cavity forming. All right, so now we're starting to see a little bit of differentiation. Okay, and so that's going to be, should have reached the uterus by this point. All right, and the zona pellucida is going to it's going to basically break away, and you're not going to have that anymore. So now you have a free floating ball of cells that's not really contained anymore. By the end of 7 days, at about a week, this should start to implant into the uterine wall, so into the endometrium. So this will be your implanting blastocyst. And so again, you're getting more differentiation. And so you have a ring of cells called trophoblast cells. You have this cavity. And then right in the middle of all this, there's the inner cell mass. And that's really what's going to be the baby. Okay, so what you've seen is sperm and egg have met over here. They've accomplished fertilization. You've gotten the cells start to divide or undergo mitosis till you get more and more and more and more undifferentiated cells. By the time it reaches the uterus, these cells are starting to differentiate. Then it implants into the uterus. And so when I say differentiation, what I'm saying is these cells now are kind of programmed to start doing a particular job. Some cells are going to start to implant and become part of the mother-baby connection, the placenta. So we haven't really got there yet, but that's what's going to happen. Some of these cells are going to start to become the skin and the digestive tract, the neural system. So these cells are starting to be programmed to start heading down a role of development. So implantation, which is when the blastocyst actually gets implanted inside the uterus, takes about a week. So 6 to 7 days after ovulation is when these trophoblasts are going to adhere to the endometrium, start to proliferate and kind of dig in. All right, and so once you have this blastocyst implanted, it literally gets coated with endometrial cells. So the uterus kind of coats it and takes it in and protects it. All right, so implantation is completed at about day 14 after ovulation. So remember, we're talking from ovulation, not fertilization. Okay. So this is what this is going to look like, kind of blowing it up. So of course this is going to be the uterus. So it's kind of floating around in the uterus. It's going to adhere to the endometrial lining. These are these trophoblast cells, and they stick to the endometrial epithelium. Okay, so this whole thing is the endometrium, and you have a layer of kind of the epithelial layer, the outermost cells that face the lumen, that these trophoblastic cells are going to stick to. All right, so we have these adherents of the trophoblast to the endometrium. We have our inner cell mass, and we have this large blastocyst cavity. So now those trophoblastic cells that have adhered, they start to differentiate, and they become these two cells. And what these basically do are kind of eat away into the uterine lining and kind of proliferate into the endometrial lining, and they kind of clear space for this blastocyst to kind of enter in and then be surrounded by the endometrial tissue. So these cells are kind of paving the way for the actual enveloping of this blastocyst by the endometrium. Okay, and so what else is going on? So we're going to show you more detail on that. But what else is going on at this point? We can't forget that we've got a hormone that's kind of keeping all this going, and that's HCG, which is human chorionic gonadotropin. And so what happens is it's going to start to be secreted by these trophoblast cells. Okay, and so as these cells differentiate, they start to become endocrine organs. So they make a hormone called HCG, and it's later made by the chorion. But what it does is it kind of feeds back to the corpus luteum in the ovary to continue making progesterone and estrogen. Because if you remember, you need these hormones to help stabilize the uterus so that you don't undergo menstruation and slough everything off. And so as long as that corpus luteum is making progesterone and estrogen, then the embryo has a chance to implant and become a baby. So this is going to be made by these trophoblast cells at first, and then as soon as these cells kind of differentiate and implant inside the uterus, they become something called the chorion, which is kind of an early placenta. And so that's going to make the HCG. So these HCG levels are going to rise until about the 2nd month. And by the end of the second month, the fully formed placenta will be there, and it will start making the progesterone and the estrogen. All right. So this is what you do a pregnancy test. This is what you're checking for. So in a pregnancy test, urine or blood of the mother, you're looking for HCG, and you can pick it up with about a week after fertilization. So here we have ovulation, and then you're going to see it has a rapid rise of HCG levels to about week 8, and then they start to fall, and they fall because by this time the placenta is being formed and it's starting to be functional, and it's starting to make its own sets of hormones. Okay, so we don't need the corpus luteum to do it anymore. All right. All right, so back to the placentation. So we've got this HCG that's being made to keep the uterus quiet so that the blastocyst has a chance to implant and then form into the embryo. So about 7.5 days, we have the blastocyst beginning its implantation. So you can see we've got this endometrial cells have now started to come around and kind of invaginate and take up this whole group of cells. You also see that these you see some more colors. See these red cells, and they have some yellow cells and some blue cells. What that's telling you is they're becoming even more differentiated. So they're going to start to differentiate, so they're going to become more things. This group here, this bilayered embryonic disc, so this area, I think it probably should change colors. Let's see, let's try every color on the page here. Let's try purple. So this little group of cells here, that's literally going to become the different parts of the baby. You're going to get your 3 germ layers. So when you think about what develops into an organism, there's an ectoderm, kind of an outer layer, a mesoderm, kind of a middle layer, and an endoderm, which is an inner layer. And we're going to talk later about what those layers actually stand for. So this group is going to become that eventually. You also have cells that are differentiating. They're going to become part of the placenta. All right, and then you have, again, you still have your this open space. So let's move to the next stage and kind of see what these early things become. So at 12 days, so about 5 days later, this inner kind of cavity becomes the yolk sac. So this is going to be the yolk sac here. So the colors kind of coordinate, so you can follow the yellow all the way through. This blue here that you hear, this amniotics, this is starting to become the amniotic cavity. So right here you get the amniotic cavity. It's even bigger here at 16 days. So the amniotic cavity, that's going to make the amniotic fluid. So if you know anything about babies, you know that they float in a bag of water later on. So that's going to form that amniotic sac and amniotic cavity. You see that you're getting the formation of the chorion, and the chorion is going to be kind of the beginnings of what's going to eventually form and make the placenta. You see that inside the endometrium, blood vessels are starting to proliferate, so you're starting to build more blood vessels here, so that the mother's blood and the blood from the fetus, they don't mix, but they come kind of close contact with each other, so that exchanges, gas exchanges, nutrient waste exchanges can occur. So you've got your chorion being developed here, you have your amnion being developed here, you have your yolk sac being developed, and then this little inner cell mass that's going to be the embryo is differentiating even more. So at about 2 weeks, 16 days after ovulation, you're really starting to see more and more differentiation. What you're seeing is this chorion, this layer here, is starting to make little finger-like projections called villi. So they're little finger-like projections they're kind of invaginating and then being surrounded by blood vessels of the mother. So you're able to kind of bathe these cells with maternal blood. So now you're going to start to get some exchange between the mother and this embryo. Okay, you have the yolk sac is becoming more developed, and now you also have the addition of the allantois, which is going to eventually become the umbilical cord. So you've got your yolk sac, which eventually will become kind of the digestive tract of the human. You've got your endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. You can see these three definitive lines that are going to become neural tissue, skin tissue, muscle tissue, bone tissue, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So everything's in place, all right, at about 16 days. Now, there's no actual organs being formed. We've just laid the groundwork, and we've laid the groundwork for the formation of a placenta. So placentation is the actual making of the placenta, and the placenta is made from both the mother and the baby. So from the embryonic tissue, it's those trophoblasts. That's going to form the embryonic portion of the placenta. And then from the mother, it's endometrial cells, okay? And so remember, the embryo makes the chorion, and so the chorion forms these finger-like villi, which are basically fingers of vasculature that will extend from the embryo and around and surrounding it, and kind of forming the embryonic portion of the placenta, but also form the umbilical cord, which is going to have arteries and veins. So let's kind of go to this next picture. I'm going to come back here in just a minute. All right. So I should have put that in different order, but you get to talking and you realize you want to change it up a little bit, so I apologize for that. So this is about 4.5 weeks. Okay. So you have your chorionic villi. So this is going to be the arteries and veins of the chorionic villi. And remember, the colors are reversed in the fetus. The red stuff are the veins, because they're bringing the oxygenated blood back to the fetus. The blue stuff's the arteries, because they're taking the waste products back out to the placenta for exchange. And you can see from this umbilical artery, artery from the mother here, it kind of makes this nice little loop structure. And it makes these little kind of like blood sinuses. So this maternal blood forms these blood sinuses that surround these chorionic villi for this exchange to take place. All right, so let me go back and talk, and then I'll come back to that picture again. So the placenta is going to be formed at about the end of the 3rd month. So at the end of 3 months, you should have a fully formed placenta, and it's really doing all the job now for the fetus. It's really the lungs for the fetus. It's the digestive system, getting the nutrition, delivering nutrition to the fetus. It's getting rid of waste products from the fetus. So it's doing a lot of work for the fetus at this point. It's also an endocrine organ, and it makes things called human placental lactogen, human chorionic thyrotropin, and relaxin. And so what these are, and we'll talk, I hope I'll remember to talk about it a little bit later, but if I don't, I'll go ahead and tell you now. What these do, if you look at the word lactogen, this is going to play a role especially toward the end of pregnancy, in helping the mother's breast tissue start to enlarge and get ready for lactation, so in order to make milk. This is like thyroid hormone, so it's acting as thyroid hormone. And then relaxin is something that, especially at the end of pregnancy, will start to relax the ligaments and allow for delivery, so that the pubic bones can start to separate a little bit and kind of gets everything ready for delivery. So it does make some hormones. If you don't have enough HCG being produced early on, then the pregnancy will abort, because if you don't have enough, if the placental hormone, what did I say? Yeah, as your HCG levels start to fall, if the placenta doesn't take that over, then the pregnancy will abort. So the HCG levels, remember, they go up and then come down. And if the placenta is not doing its job at about 12 weeks, then the pregnancy will abort. Let me go back to that slide. So here's what I'm talking about. And so this is why, some people say, oh, don't tell anybody you're pregnant until you pass that 12-week mark. And that's kind of the reason, because if you hit that 12-week mark and the placenta is not doing its job, that's when you have the miscarriage. And so that's a common reason for a miscarriage, is the placenta is not making the progesterone and estrogens, and so then the pregnancy aborts. So that's why people will wait before they tell anybody that they're pregnant. If you've ever heard someone say, you should wait, that's why. You're waiting for everything to be on track. So typically, again, mother and embryo blood doesn't mix. You just kind of have the chorionic villi kind of being bathed by the maternal blood. Um, but, never say never. Things do break, capillaries break, vessels break, and sometimes there is mixing, but there shouldn't be very much. All right, so let's go back to this picture. And so here we have a 4.5-week embryo. I call this the chicken stage because if you look at the embryo of any vertebrate animal like a chicken or a human or a dolphin or a dog, they all pretty much look the same at this stage. You can't really tell it's a human yet. You can see an eye, you can see the beginnings of a head, some little limb buds, and we all have a tail at some point early on in development. So this is the early embryo. So we still call it the embryo because it doesn't really look like a person yet. You have your amniotic cavity filled with amniotic fluid. So this membrane is called the amnion. So that's going to form and hold that amniotic fluid inside. You have your yolk sac. So this is going to be the yolk sac here. You have the formation of the umbilical cord here. So you've got blood vessels, the arteries and veins that make the umbilical cord. You have the chorion, which is going to make the embryonic side of the placenta. And you have the uterine wall, which is turning into what's called deciduous basalis and decidua capsularis, which are kind of surrounding this whole structure and kind of making the structure of the placenta. All right. At about 13 weeks, we call it a fetus because now it starts to look like something we recognize. You can see this does look like a human, definite head with a face and little fingers and arms and legs and fingers and toes. You have a fully formed umbilical cord. You can see everything's kind of wrapped up nicely. It's a fully formed umbilical cord. The yolk sac is just about gone. You have a fully formed amnion. Amniotic fluid is filling up the sac. The placenta will wind up being kind of a pancake-shaped structure, usually on the kind of the top side of the uterus near the fundus. So now we have a fully formed placenta, and all the stuff that was surrounding it previously, all the stuff that was kind of on the bottom side, if you will, has basically degenerated. So this is going to be the fully formed placenta, and now it's doing all the work that it needs to do. It's producing all the hormones it's supposed to make, progesterone, estrogen, and everything should continue at this stage. All right, so at 13 weeks, we've kind of passed the safe point. The placenta's formed, and now the baby can continue to just grow and grow and grow. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about fetal development in the next video, but I wanted to go back and make sure you understand that there are 4 very important membranes that have to form in this process, okay? And I've kind of pointed them out as we've been talking, but I want to make sure that I hit those 4 structures and you know what they are and what they do. Then you can go back and look at your pictures and kind of see how they progress through this whole implantation through placentation event. So the first one is the amnion, and it's a transparent membrane that's filled with amniotic fluid. So again, what it does is it provides a buoyant environment that protects the embryo, right? So the baby's floating in that environment. It helps protect the baby. It's cushioning. It also provides a homeostatic temperature. If you think back to, we talked about 201, one of the things that's cool about water is that it absorbs and releases heat slowly. So even as the mother's temperature is changing, if she's going outside and getting hot or cold or whatever, that amniotic fluid will not allow for really large temperature changes to occur in the fetus. It's going to stay pretty constant. This amniotic fluid is made from maternal blood at the beginning, so kind of portions of the plasma basically, and then later as the embryo and now the fetus and the baby is starting to have its organs turn on, specifically the kidneys are going to start to function and start to filter the baby's blood, and it's going to make urine. And so a lot of the amniotic fluid toward the end is going to be made from the actual urine of the fetus, okay? But it's sterile because the baby's breathing in and swallowing, and the amniotic fluid is just passing through the baby over and over and over again. So don't freak out. It's not a big deal. All right, the next one is the yolk sac, and it's going to be on the ventral surface of the embryo, that yellow sac that we talked about. It will form part of the digestive tube. Now, if you think about other animals, like think about a chicken, and so you have the big yellow yolk inside the egg. Because the chicken's not attached to the mom, you've laid the egg, that yolk sac is providing the nutrition for the developing chicken. So that's the job of the yolk sac in a lot of animals, is to provide the nutrition for the developing baby. But because in mammals, the baby is connected to the mother through an umbilical cord, you don't need that yolk sac to provide nutrition. But if you think about reptiles and that lay eggs, and chickens that lay eggs, and things like that, that's what the yolk sac does. It provides the nutrition. All right. In humans and mammals, it's going to provide early blood cells, so it's important for that. And it's the source of some primordial germ cells. So not nutritive for us, but it does have an important role. Then you have the allantoid, which is kind of the end, at the caudal end, the tail end of the yolk sac. It's going to become the structure, the base of the umbilical cord. So the umbilical cord will build off of that. And then eventually it becomes the bladder, the urinary bladder of the child. Lastly, you have the chorion, and again, it's going to be from the embryo that's going to form the placenta. All right, so it's going to basically what encloses all those embryonic tissues and membranes and forms the embryonic version or portion of the placenta. All right, so that's it for implantation and placentation. Again, as we're moving through these difficult concepts in 202, I do encourage you to read. There's a lot of information out there, so not only watch the videos, but you should be reading as well. All right, thanks a lot, and I will see you in the next video.